All right, good evening, everybody. This is Bill Levine from New York, and I have the pleasure of being able to introduce tonight's esteemed panel for the 8th Orthomentor Webinar. Tabs Ayer, one of the original 3 creators of Orthomentor, will be moderating tonight's session, coming to us from the University of Miami, but relocating shortly to Johns Hopkins University. Congratulations, Tabs, on your next chapter in life. Lauren Gainey, Program Director at the University of Connecticut, and outstanding mentor and educator. My friend Mac Hogan at the University of Pittsburgh, who has been the Vice Chair there and Program Director, and Nikki Schrader from the University of California, San Francisco, who just shared with us she's coming back from a nice little getaway. Nikki has been on several of our webinars, and Don Laporte, Vice Chair of Education and Program Director at Johns Hopkins, is the final panelist. Tonight's discussion revolves around one of the most intense topics right now for medical students considering their 4th year. All things being equal, God willing, you're going to be able to choose one away sub-I this year. And Dr. Ayer, thanks very much. Take it away. You're on mute, Tabs.
All right.
It's your first Zoom conference in a year.
In a year. I'm getting rusty. First off, everyone, thank you so very much for your time. Thanks to the esteemed panelists who are here tonight. And thanks to all of you who are tuning in for yet another iteration of the Orthomentor Webinar series. This is perhaps one of the most challenging sort of times that we've been facing. You know, we're finishing up the sort of COVID match or post-COVID match cycle and interpretations that are probably going on, you know, day in, day out amongst all the faculty here, as well as faculty with students at home. And we now are faced with sort of a new iteration of a challenge, which is one-away rotation. And exactly what do we need to do to sort of guide students like yourselves in and out of orthopedics, and how best do we strategize for the new match cycle, knowing what changes are happening on the horizon. So one of the things that I'm going to sort of kind of outline is, we'll start by just what do we tell the students? And I think there's a lot of different nuances associated with this. And we're gonna go through many things. We probably will not cover everything you can kind of, every permutation you can think of, but we'll do our best to at least give some concrete feedback as to what we're sharing with our students at different parts of the country. And hopefully that will give you some additional perspective to, you know, and talking points with your faculty members at home. So Dr. Gainey, if you have I don't know how many students at UConn that are applying to orthopedics as an example this year, but what are you telling your, you know, if you have multiple students, what kinds of things should students be thinking about as they're moving into this, into this land of applying to only one away rotation or having only one away rotation specifically?
Sure. So, UConn tends to have a fairly small number this year. We're actually, have 7 going into orthopedics, which is pretty high for us. But, my advice as far as, especially having one away rotation, I think the challenge too is knowing what the schools are going to be doing, because different parts of the country, we don't know if everyone's going to be able to accept, the 30 students a year or whatever they normally do. So, I think that it's important, just like applying to programs to apply as a residency, to talk to each other. I think communication is really critical in the sense that, like we all say, unfortunately, students from the same school are going to be competitors of each other. And so, really talking to each other about what your priorities are. Maybe someone has certain interests that somebody else may not have. They have family in different parts of the country, and making sure that, everyone really sits down and talks, and everyone outlines what their first and second choices are, and trying to be, really, talk to each other. And like I said, just understand that people are going to have different interests than you do, and making sure that we try to prioritize each other's, number ones.
Would you suggest, that's great feedback. And before I go into to kind of talking about geography, as you were alluding to, what should students do, like at their institution, like UConn, you've got 7 kids. Should they sort of talk amongst themselves to try to figure out, hey, how do we sort of make sure we're not overlapping with one
Right.
another? And especially at other institutions where the advising or sort of faculty involvement may not be as robust, what kinds of measures can students take to help assuage the situation in that regard specifically?
Yeah, and there's so many different ways you guys can communicate with each other. I think having a Google document or something where everyone can outline, what their interests are, where they're applying, and just make sure that, I mean, especially locally, I mean, we always have a big number of people that want to go to Tufts and BU and Brown, and just, making sure that if somebody has a particular interest, say they have family, in Chicago or on the West Coast, that maybe that's a good opportunity to go somewhere else where you're going to have less competition from your own local students. So again, I think it's a matter of communicating, finding out, what your interests really are, and making sure that you're not just applying to some place because it's local if it's not someplace you really want to go to.
That's a really great point. And I think that really segues into the next question. And Dr. Hogan, I'll ask this of you. How should students really look at different geographic locations, especially if they're like, listen, I have a variety of different places that I want to potentially get into or train at or whatever, and I can only do one. So how do you guide students in terms of thinking about the geographical piece, which is often very important to some students more than others?
Oh, no, great question. What I usually advise my students to do is, from the beginning, I actually start with, give me 60 programs you're interested in. I tell them to go in thirds. I say 60, normally students fight back and they want to give me 75 to 90. I would really rather them give me 30, but I recognize they won't accept that from me. And so I say, give me, and then I ask them to break it up into thirds. And then from that listing of their main interest, I take that list, file it away. And then if it changes or modifies or balloons, I say, why are you trying to give away your money to people you don't even know? And so I start from that top 20 and start talking to them about the regional pieces. Why are they interested in those things? And so when I first meet with a student, if I don't have the information already, but I ask them where are they from, where they grow up, where they train. And I also ask them about their ties, family, and also their interests. And so when you've worked with students over 2 or 3 years, you have a lot of that already in mind. When you have it, and some of these students, you may only meet them the year before, 6 months before they apply, I ask those same core questions. And then from there, the regional piece, I then start working down to the other pieces in regards to the type of programs they may be interested in, and whether they have ties to certain areas, et cetera. And usually when you talk to the students for a little while, you actually get a lot of great feedback, and you come to some conclusions together in regards to where they may want to apply, and go from there. So that's my approach.
That's kind of a great way of doing it. And I share something similar where I say, hey, think about a few different locations, and then think about 5 to 10 places in each of those locations, and start breaking it down according to different attributes. What kinds of things do you suggest when students are thinking about different geographical locations? What kinds of things are you sharing attribute wise they should be looking into specifically with regards to a training program that they might be interested in?
I really advise students to research the programs. I say with everything on the web, and I ask them to research the programs on their own. I mean, the same things we've talked about in this forum a number of times, and it's really the same formula. Research the programs everywhere they can. Then I ask them to research it via anyone they can, right? Other students, alums, residents in our programs. And if they mention certain areas, I mean, we have a large program, so we're fortunate, or a number of us have networks. I actually try to connect them with students or residents who I know who may have some connection with those programs, whether they're in that program, whether they rotated there in the past, whether they're from that area, or even from that medical school and match somewhere else. And so if I try to think about how can I essentially link that individual with my respective network to get more information, right? To kind of feed their interest and their inquiry. And I advise them, based on before I would tell them, I don't think you should do more than 3 away rotations. And I would tell them, look into applying to 5 or 6 because of scheduling. That was obviously pre the year of 1. And so now I would advise them a little bit differently, but that's what I advise them to do on region. And then I ask them, when someone says, I want to go here, I say, okay, why? So I challenge them. I say, tell me why you want to go there versus it just sounds exciting. Or, you want to go there because you heard a good thing, or you're just saying, oh, well, I heard they'll take someone and no one else is applying there. That's not a good reason, in isolation. You need to have several check boxes in my mind, and then we go from there.
Right. Those are all great points. And one question I want to ask Dr. Shorter before we go to Dr. Laporte is the question I get all the time is, how do I find out about programs? Right? A lot of websites may have been updated this year secondary to COVID, but what would you suggest that students do, or what are you suggesting to your students that they do to try to find out more information on a program prior to a virtual opportunity, but just as a general, even now, when they're trying to figure out, as Dr. Hogan's alluding to, what's the best program, what's the best fit for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of it comes into doing the research on the website, right? Looking at now, most programs have Instagram accounts or Facebook profiles where you can get information about the program and about the residents. It can give you a sense of who's there. You can look at the resident life page, which often has information about what the residents do socially, what their life outside of work is, and then it also has a rotation schedule. So I think spending some time navigating the websites, and I can certainly tell you many of them, including our own, is pretty clunky. So it does take a while to look through them, but you can glean a lot of information from them. And then, like Dr. Hogan was saying, is I spend a lot of time connecting them with people who have trained there, or other, older residents who have come from programs, or even faculty who have trained at other facilities, because I think that's the best way. And then, particularly now with the one away, I say when that decision is made, then the other places that were really high on your list, but not your one places, you need to do a lot of research on them, and you need to reach out to residents and faculty there to talk to them about the programs.
That's awesome. And Dr. Laporte at Hopkins, what are you recommending to students to kind of get, similar information as far as how do you figure out what a way that you're most interested in doing?
Similar to what Dr. Hogan and Dr. Schroeder said, we're definitely having them research the programs, but I think it's really important to connect with somebody who's at the program or who knows about the program. So either we'll connect them with a resident there, or somebody who's been a student there and knows about the program. I think that's your best initial contact to know about the place. We can also connect with faculty members as well.
That's awesome. And I think another important point that's being brought up is that, so talking to faculty, right? Faculty is a great way to kind of try to figure out what type of program that you're interested in. And as all three have just said, connecting with residents, they're an untapped source of knowledge many times. So definitely the residents have connections all over the place themselves. And certainly expanding that to include social media accounts, as being mentioned, also can be another way to kind of get an insider look at what the program is like, and whether that aligns with the attributes of a program you're particularly interested in. So Dr. Laporte, I'll ask you, and you and I were going back and forth about this earlier, how many rotations, they have one, how many ways should they be applying to? Should you apply to 5, 10, 15 for the one? Is there a number that's too many? Is there one that's too little? What's sort of an ideal number in your mind as far as how many they should, submit applications to specifically?
So I think that's a great question. This year is different than any other year because not only are the students limited to one rotation, but the rotations can't start until August 1st. So that means there's a shorter window. So I think the demand for these aways is going to be greater than the supply. And for that reason, I'm leaning towards recommending to our students that they apply to 3 programs. I think somebody who is looking at more reach programs, maybe 3 to 5 programs. But I think having a good target and applying to more than one, because you're not sure that you'll get it or the schedule will work, or who knows what will happen with COVID. But not, at least my gut feeling, and we don't know, is I probably wouldn't apply to many more than, 4 or 5, because you may end up having to say no to 4 programs. I would think that programs and program directors will be much more understanding this year if you have to say no to an away. But I think at least my initial thought is about 3 programs.
Okay. Dr. Gady, I'll ask you the same question. How many programs for that single rotation should people be applying to?
I mean, that's about similarly what we're telling our students is we're telling them to pick 3. You know, it's a balance, I think, because, you know, and this question's kind of come up a bunch of times as far as how are you going to be interpreted if you say no? And in the past, it's always been, you know, if you cancel, and I think it's a difference between canceling and saying, no, I already have another opportunity. So I think that's important, because if you think from our standpoint, you know, we have a certain number of spots and we want to optimize our ability to match too. So if you cancel 2 weeks before it's supposed to start versus, you know, you apply on VSAS and we offer it and you say, you know, I've already accepted another one, I think that's going to be interpreted as 2 different things. So I would certainly avoid accepting more than one. Well, I would say that I think it's certainly reasonable to apply to 3 or 4, and it may depend on how competitive of an applicant you are. But I would certainly, you know, in the past, what I've always told students is, you know, go to one reach, go to one place you feel like you're a really, really good candidate at, and go to one place that, you know, really is going to be number 1 on your list. You know, I would probably stay away from the reach schools this year, because you don't want to, you got one shot and you want to make sure you get an interview there. So you don't want to take an opportunity, really a missed opportunity, that you're not going to even get selected for an interview.
I think those are great points that Dr. Laporte and Dr. Gainey have, you know, brought up. And I think this is why these conversations are so important with, you know, in this particular environment, or with faculty advisors at your home program. You have to be very careful not to alienate the programs by, as Dr. Gainey was getting at, you know, telling them, hey, you know, 2 weeks out, you know, you're not going to be able to do it for whatever the reason may be. But at the same time, you want the programs, as Dr. Laporte said, are going to be much more understanding probably this year, even beyond other years, as to the fact that, hey, people are just trying to figure things out, which is something that's, you know, very challenging when you've got a lot of people applying for just, you know, one particular rotation. Which brings me to my next question, Dr. Shorter. What if you don't, you know, I wanted to do my single away at UCSF, and for some reason y'all said no, so I didn't get that. Now what should I do? And what kinds of things should students be prepared for if they don't get the away that they want specifically?
Yeah, that's a hard answer. I did see one of the chat questions is, do you apply for all the months of the same program? So like, you know, if we can start in August, that's our plan, and we will run longer. Typically our sub-I season has been May through even November. We've had people at our program. I've checked over and over as many times as I can at UCSF to make sure that, you know, are we allowed to still have the same number of slots for sub-Is that we've had for students, and have gotten that answer that it's okay. You know, so I do think that you should consider applying for multiple months. And I'd love to hear kind of what everybody else says, because if you really have one place that you really want to go and August is full, but maybe you are more flexible in your schedule and you can apply it in September or October or November, then you should consider that as your option. And, you know, unfortunately, yes, some places might only be able to have 3 rotating students at a time. They might not be able to have the 13 that typically, you know, come through their program. And I think that, you know, you have to have a backup plan. You have to have another place that you're going to be okay with. And if it's somewhere, you know, we have out in California, I always get the question of, I'm from California. I, you know, went to med school in California, undergraduate in California, but I would totally be willing to cross the country for residency. But my application never shows that, right? So then that's the question that you kind of have with them, is like, well, then maybe you really need to say, I'm going to do an away somewhere else. So I do have that conversation with our students to tell them that you really have to think about your whole application as a whole, to how you will represent yourself when someone looks at your application. Because sometimes from California, they'll see, went to California, did everything in California, did their sub-I in California. There's no way they're going to come to Tennessee, you know? So I think my long answer to that is, consider applying for multiple months and make sure that your schedule will allow you to do that its 4th year, and then just have other backups.
Hey,
I think those are all. Yes.
I'll just ask one quick question.
Sure.
There's a really good question from Hogan Breakhound. Were there any trends in this year's match that I should take into consideration when choosing where to do an away rotation? Can you guys all address that? I think that's a really critical question. Thanks.
I'll send that question to Dr. Gainey first because she's to the left of me on my screen. And then I will, and I'll just go around the corner and then I'll answer that question last.
Yeah,
So I have
great.
the most time to think about it.
Nice
I mean-
moderator prerogative, Ted.
So, I mean, I wouldn't, it's interesting because I was really sure this year that a lot of people were going to end up matching into their home program. I thought that was going to be a huge trend, that most people would stay local just because they knew people or they were, a known commodity. They'd done the home away rotation. And honestly, and I don't have clear, like real data on this, just from, looking at where all the people that we interviewed matched and where, other colleagues of mine, their group. I didn't really see that as much as I expected to. I think that, I don't know, I didn't see any particular trends. And honestly, even where we matched was very similar to where we've matched in the past. And, we tend to have certain schools that, for years, we always had someone match from Tufts. And we always had somebody, now the past couple of years, we've had people match from BU and downstate. So I think the regional thing is always the situation that we see. And there's certain schools that, we tend to see a lot of applicants from, but I wouldn't say that there's any, at least I didn't see, I'm interested to hear what everyone else has to say, many different trends than I've seen in the past.
Dr. Hogan?
No, I wouldn't say there are any trends. I think the year proved that we, can match individuals without away rotations, which I will be surprised if multiple med schools don't start asking us to stop this, because we're one of the last specialties to actually do this left on the planet. And in the other scenario, one thing I did find, and for us, and Dr. Fu and I have talked about this, and I don't know if the other Northeast and institutions have figured it out. We matched a lot of people this year from the West Coast. It was definitely obvious. I think 5 out of our 8 had West Coast institutions. And there are definitely some jokes and theories about that. They didn't have to experience a winter of traveling to the Northeast in December or January for an interview. I mean, it's just quite, frank, right? I mean, and I have no idea if that had anything to do with it, being from Alabama myself, but maybe, but nothing that you could actually hang your hat on. So I think it really just comes down to the right place. In the same scenario, we matched individuals from our med school into West Coast programs. They didn't rotate. I mean, they had solid applications, but had no other framework to go with it. So I don't think it's anything we can really, that I know here at Pitt that we can pinpoint as a result of this year, but it's a great question.
Dr. Laporte?
I agree that there are no definite trends. We matched students that had not connected with us beforehand, but I do think something that was different this past year was there was a lot more networking and connecting through Zoom social events or through virtual experiences and opportunities. And looking at some of the information that Dr. Levine's presented before, a lot of the programs matched students who had connected with them in some way. So that's not saying, obviously there were no aways, but I think making the effort to connect either with a resident or a faculty member there, or participate in a version of a virtual opportunity can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Levine?
Oh, I get to answer?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you look at the trends around the country, I think what Lauren said is absolutely correct. There are some programs that matched a lot of home students, right? There were some that matched Miami matched 4 out of 7.
5.
A couple of places matched 4 out of 5, 5 out of 6. But there were a lot of places. You look at Mayo, you look at Harvard, you look at some of the big programs, and some of the mid-range programs where it was business as usual. So I think for all of the talk of gloom and doom this year about it being unfair and it wasn't going to work, I don't think it was that different, guys. I think that, most of the programs that that the students listening tonight are thinking about applying to, your chances historically have always been greater matching at your home school and the places you did your 3 away sub-Is. Statistically speaking, that makes sense because those are the programs that knew you the best. So this past cycle, we had no away rotations, but you guys were able to do your classmates, your peers of the year ahead of you, were doing about 3 away visiting rotations. You couldn't do much more than that. So if you look at it from that perspective, I don't think it's much different. At Columbia, we matched 6 students, 5 either were 2 Columbia students, 3 that participated in our virtual CLIP program, and only 1 who didn't participate in our visiting rotation. That's about the normal numbers that we would have had if we had had the 50 or so visiting sub-Is that we typically have in a normal year. So I think whether you do the one last thing I'd say to answer the 500 questions in the Q&A and chat box about this is you're going to apply for how many you're going to apply to, and we'll talk about that at the very end. At least I'll give you my perspective. And let's say you get into one and you don't get into the 2 or 3. Those 2 or 3, you're going to now put at the top of your, I want to participate in your virtual offering list, whatever that is this year, and you're going to demonstrate your interest that way. And if the program doesn't like you because of that, well, then you don't like that program, because that's, I mean, you can only choose one. So the program can't hold you accountable. But what you've heard is don't cancel one day before if you already know that you are into a place. Be respectful of the programs, give them as much notice as you can, and that the programs, if anything, should realize you guys are doing the best you can with the information you have, and that's how I would handle it.
Dr. Short, great answer. Dr. Schroeder, same question.
Got nothing new to add to that.
I would, well, everything y'all are adding is amazing. I think personally, the thing that and in talking with a lot of kids post-match, I probably observed just a couple of different things that are kind of important. One is the fact that the in-person interview is a lot different than the Zoom interaction. And while some people may fare well no matter what environment you put them in, others, some of their sort of misgivings, or the way in which they interact, the way in which they kind of lack of being able to kind of see physical cues and kind of go off of that, I think that probably hurt many students. So a very different is a paradigm shift in the way in which we engage. And I think that probably cost many students their ability to perform well on a handful of interviews they may have had. Second thing is that transparency about their real performance. I think I've talked to so many students. I know Dr. Levine and I talk about this all the time. There are many institutions where how well the student really is doing is really unbeknownst to them until post-match or lack of match thereafter. And I think the transparency piece with all of our students is absolutely critical. And that is something that for me, and just in what I've observed, has become that much more unmasked this time around. So we need to do better for our students so we can give them the tools to succeed, whether it's in orthopedics or otherwise. And the third thing is that we cannot understate or underscore the importance of mentorship, because the advocacy, the mentorship piece that we've all been sort of alluding to and talking about, that is, I think, that much more critical now more than ever. And so this ongoing dialogue we have in this forum or others or one-on-one with our students, I think that's the final piece. And with that, I'll sort of share my take on, the length of the away rotation, which is, should you do a 2-week or should you do a 4-week one? And I would say, honestly, it's in past years, I would say, yeah, like, it's no big deal to do a 2-week one. But if you're like going all in with a particular program, you only get one shot, then it's probably a better idea to do a 4-week rotation specifically, just to maximize your ability to really get kind of exposure to faculty, residents, staff, and really demonstrate your clinical acumen, the way in which you integrate into teams, and so on. I'll shift gears and ask Dr. Gainey, when's the latest someone should be doing an away rotation, especially this cycle?
So, I mean, I think definitely before Thanksgiving, I think that's when, I don't know, there's been a lot of talk, and I think that we all really, most of us anyway, liked the universal invite day. So I don't know when that's going to be, but certainly you want to rotate before whatever that date is. So I would say at the very latest November, but even that is probably going to be after your applications are already starting to be reviewed. Part of it depends on whether you're going to be relying on a letter of recommendation from that program, because, and again, last year was a little bit different. This year is going to be a little different. I'd say I think most of us would probably say the best thing you could do would be to get all of your letters from orthopedic surgeons. That being said, not all programs have home programs that may be challenging without away rotation. So I think particularly for places that don't have strong mentorship, don't have somebody that they can really advocate for them and write a really strong letter at their home program, doing it earlier is going to be better to try to get a letter in.
That's wonderful advice. And I think that that's an important thing to think about, especially knowing that, the timing of ERAS, the timing of when the dean's letters are going in terms of being able to get an away rotation. And going back to the geography piece, and please, everyone on the panel, please correct me if I'm wrong. Programs don't really know where you're doing an away, like where you are planning on going to, right? They don't know or where you've done it away unless you specifically get a letter from that institution. Does everyone agree with that? Or do you guys know what rotations students have gone on?
This is the biggest myth, I think, of away rotations. And I don't know if you guys hear this all the time. There's this idea of unlocking the Midwest or unlocking Chicago. And somehow this is passed down, I think, from other students. But I think that, unless you physically talk to somebody, you have no idea where you rotated unless you have a letter of recommendation. And so, I always say it's hard to write a good letter of recommendation when you've been with somebody for a week. I think the benefit of getting a letter is just to show interest geographically, but I don't know how strong a letter can usually be coming from an away rotation. There are certainly some great ones, but it's hard to rely on it since you never know how much time you're gonna be spending with a single person, is the advice I give my students.
Well, I do think you can see where people are doing aways, because they do get a blurb filled out that goes into their dean's letter, usually, that, as part of the sub-I. So like if we have sub-Is that have rotated through us, we fill out a blurb that typically, if it's before the dean's letter is written, does go in their note. Or if you look at the transcript, oftentimes it will say sub-I.
Dr. Levine?
Yeah, I was just going to say the other big myth, and students tell us this all the time, is that they get asked this question by programs all the time. They get inappropriately asked, where did you do your aways? Where are you applying to? Why are you applying to those programs? So, I think we have to be honest. They get asked really inappropriate questions. And for the students, you just have to figure out, how do you handle inappropriate questions, whether it's about race, sex, having children, or where you do your aways. They're likely going to happen. And we certainly get told by students all the time that they are happening.
I'll ask Dr. Hogan this question. I want to then hear Dr. Schroeder's take on the same question, which is, should students bank on getting a letter of recommendation from an away? Like if they're going there, because many students say, oh, I'm going to go to XYZ place to get a letter, right? For whatever the reason may be. So should students be really relying on that away rotation for a letter specifically? And in what circumstance might they, need to prioritize that as a goal over others?
I think Dr. Gady mentioned it or alluded to this. If you are coming from a program where you do not have an orthopedic department, or you do not have as many, orthopedic surgical faculty mentors that you can lean on for letters, then going into an away rotation, I do believe you're trying to make a positive impact anyway. And so you should maybe be a little more, I won't say aggressive, about trying to push to work toward a letter. But I do believe it's reasonable when you start that rotation, you get a couple of days into that, if you're able to develop a relationship with a resident or two to say, hey, look, I'm going to be looking to get a letter. Talk to people. At the end of the day, the one thing that everyone is trying to figure out with this, unfortunately, COVID world on top of the virtual world, who can actually communicate? Who can communicate an objective, a purpose, strive for it, achieve it without annoying the hell out of everyone in the process? All right. Point blank, period. And so if you actually have a willingness to go down that road, I think you should go for a letter. I'm one, and others may disagree. I do not believe in targeting a place specifically for a letter from that place. I think it's a bad move unless you have to balance that so intricately to not have something basically firebomb you into a bad rotation experience. And we as program directors, right, we hear about the bad experience. We hear about the person who went in maybe a little too hot and heavy, and they didn't even get an interview there, in years past. And so I just think you have to balance that with realities. And I think you also have to accept the realities from some faculty members. I mean, Bonnie Mason is one who would say, you don't go to the faculty member and say, hey, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? But you need to figure out who you talk to in that person's camp who can allude to whether they can or cannot do that, or a willingness to do that. And that's usually via the residents or staff members if you can develop a relationship with them. It's much harder to do it if you stay for only 2 weeks. As you said, if you stay for 4 weeks, be intentful about it, but while being respectful. So that's a long response, and I hope it answered the question. But if you go in too hot and heavy, you're just going to firebomb yourself, and they're not going to want you to come back. I mean, simple as that. Now you have no letter and no interview, so you lost twice, right?
That's a great point. Dr. Schroeder, same question. How should students, and I'll add this other point that Dr. Hogan was kind of getting at, what's your take on whether if students are saying, hey, I really want to go to I want to go to Columbia to get a letter from Dr. Levine. And how might that person, kind of like, would you advise for that? And then secondly, how do they really approach the faculty or resident that they're gonna, ask for the letter from? What are the things that you would suggest that they do in order to actually get that letter?
Number one, I would not recommend going to a place to get a letter of recommendation. So I would think probably everybody here might agree with that. So, and I think that and you'll see how that evolves over the course of the rotation too. You may be put on a rotation where you spend 4 weeks with one attending, and that may give you an excellent rapport with that attending, and you may be able to ask him or her at the end for a letter of recommendation. But I don't tell my residents to go into a place, or my students to go into a place looking to get a letter of recommendation. On the flip side, if you do feel like it, you feel comfortable asking for a letter of recommendation, or that's still in your thought process despite the advice that I give you, part of your goal needs to be to let the residents that you work with, the team that you work with, if that's what you're looking for, so that they can actually help put you with somebody for most of a rotation. Because oftentimes, like for instance, on one of our trauma rotations, you may be with a different attending every day of the week, and you may have little interaction unless the residents say, oh gosh, they want to work with X person, so let's make sure that they're in the OR with them twice a week and that they're in their clinic every week, right? So I think that, that means being available and in front of the attending that you're asking for the letter with. And then, I do think that it's really best first to get feedback from the residents that you work with, get feedback from the attendings that you work with before you are going to ask them that awkward question that always comes up. Can you write me a strong letter, right? Because strong letters can mean different things for a lot of people, and it really only helps if it's a strong letter. So I think it just, do your kind of research behind the scenes first before you move forward to ask for that letter.
Hey, Nikki, can I ask you a question? Do you think any faculty at UCSF ever answer no to that question when the student says, can you write me a strong letter? Have you read letters that weren't particularly strong from some of your partners, and then you wonder, boy, why did they say yes when they got asked the question we all get asked?
Yeah, I've had on both fronts. I've had people write strong letters that weren't that strong, and I've had people say no to students that they didn't feel like comfortable enough writing them in a strong letter. They didn't have enough exposure to them, and I applaud those faculty for doing that. And sometimes it comes, you're writing a letter for your students who you have to really, push for them in their strengths. You really have to find their strengths for the letters that you're writing.
And Tabs, I have one other, thanks for that, Nikki. Tabs, one of the anonymous attendees asks a question: how would you suggest students decide if a program is a reach or a match? Is it just based on board scores, or other factors like research and clinical grades similarly important? Can I just give my answer to that, and then I'd love to hear others.
Sure.
I say this every webinar, and I know that this doesn't happen everywhere, so I give that disclaimer. To the extent you can at your own institutions, you do need to know where you stack up relative to your same school peers. So Dr. Laporte at Hopkins can at least give you a general guideline. And for the students strategy, I've talked to a lot of students this year. So if they don't have to tell you you're number 1 out of 20, but if they can at least tell you, listen, based on historic data and where you stack up with the other 19 peers, you're the top tier, you're the middle tier, or you're the third tier from our school this year. That's invaluable information. If you cannot gather that from your school, then it's very hard. And I acknowledge that from the outset. But if you can, then you can figure out very quickly with your faculty mentor, with a program director, or with whoever is managing that at your own school, hopefully somebody is, whether it's a reach or a match, because you can say, listen, we've had 10 students in the last 10 years match at UCSF with your exact kind of portfolio. And that's invaluable. You can also say, we've never had anybody match at UCSF with this portfolio. We really think this would be a reach, and you only get one choice. Maybe UCSF is not the best place for you.
I think that's, I think what you're saying is exactly right, Dr. Levine, that being able to sort of be stratified against your peers is perhaps one of the best ways to at least gauge sort of the kind of program type that you should be looking at, and I think that unfortunately doesn't happen, robustly enough. And I know even in trying to get some of our deans to do that more concretely this year, they didn't really, maybe they were just too busy or whatever it is. But I certainly tried to do that amongst our applicants, and I think that helped in some regard, at least to get a feel for, hey, how they fared. So at least at a basic value, they could better understand how many programs they should be applying to, and or the types of programs that were maybe a little bit closer to within their reach versus ones that are not. But I'll actually ask that question to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Gainey. How are you guiding at UConn, the best way to approach which ways to do, specifically with regards to, hey, a reach program versus one that's considered safe? And how do you sort of kind of identify if a program is considered a reach or if they're safe on top of it all?
Yeah, I mean, I try to, and we're fortunate that we, again, don't have a huge, it's not like we'd have 25, 30 students going into it. So I try to sit down with them with their CVs and go through their priorities as far as location, family, where their family is, number of, residents. I mean, it's hard because it's hard to know what exactly you want at this stage. I think in general, the things that are kind of a little bit easier would be, do you like research? Do you want something research heavy? Do you want a, size program? Do you want, 5 or 6, or do you want, 15 students? And then location. And so, I try to sit down with them and look at their priorities from that standpoint, and then kind of find some good options for them based on where their CV is as far as board scores. Again, a little harder this year because a lot of our students are just getting their board scores in now, so trying to kind of make last minute decisions is a little bit more challenging.
That's wonderful to hear. And I totally agree with you that it is definitely always, the more complete a CV you have, and the better it is, the easier it is. But again, that's one element of it all too. And I think that you also have to think about, it's always hard, especially around this time when you haven't necessarily spent time in the clinic or the OR with like faculty, for them to also really get a good feel for what your clinical performance is like. So Dr. Shorter, I'll ask you the question, when you're guiding the students now, which ways to do and to pick, what sort of guidance are you telling them on how best to actually go about picking the 3 or 5 programs they may be applying to this coming year?
Yeah, I think the hardest part of all of these webinars, right, it really comes down to a personal discussion with the student themselves, because you need to look at their whole application, right? Who they are, what they're interested in, what their scores are, what their evaluations might be, whether we have them or not, right? So if you're asking for like a global kind of description of what I do, is I sit down with these students and talk to them about, all right, so now UCSF is now non-honors for our core rotations. All I have is step scores. What research have you done? So those are kind of the 3 things that I can have that discussion with. What does the rest of your CV look like? Tell me kind of what you've done over your years as a human being, and what kind of community service have you done? What kind of outreach have you done? Tell me a little bit about, how you're contributing to diversity and leadership, et cetera. And then it's where do you want to be, right? Like, Lauren was saying is, you have to say, what type of program are you looking for? I always say, is it, put down a pros and cons list of what you're looking for in a program, which includes size, research, location, close to family, all of these things. And it may be, are there women at the program? Because I think that's a big consideration for women going into orthopedics. No one wants to be like a token female at a program, right? So that's also something to consider. And then we go through that, and then I say, okay, what other priorities do you have? Because I think if you talk to graduating residents and you ask what they thought was important versus what really is important when they graduate, they have a different view than when they were applying, right? So a lot of them say, well, gosh, it's really important to have a very good mentorship. It's really important. It was really important for me, for my spouse to be happy where we were. It was very important that I had the ability to pick up the phone and call and attending no matter what time of day it was. Those are kind of things that senior residents say when they talk about leaving a program, which medical students don't think about when they come in. But so I try and kind of incorporate that into the questions that I'm asking so that I know where to direct their thinking. And then that helps me kind of, then I say, what's your list? Do you have your 60 or your 40? And then we kind of go through that. And I'll say, why is it this one? And it may be location or it may be research. And then we try and hone it from there.
That's absolutely amazing. And those are things I'm going to even include in my, as I move up north to Baltimore. Dr. Laporte, I'll ask you, so should students look at, and to what extent should students be looking at the recent matches from the medical school? And especially in this year where there was no ways, is it reasonable to look at those programs that they matched at, or is that sort of an aberrant year? And should they be looking at programs from prior years where students had the chance to do away rotations?
I think that's a good question. And I guess I don't know for sure, but I would say most of the programs and program directors that I've spoken to use this, similar criteria, minus having the away rotation, and matched what we at least think are similar applicants as we have in previous years. So I think it's reasonable to look at the students who matched this year to see what kind of students that program's matching. But it's also very easy to look back a couple of years and see where students from your medical school have gone and how they match up with you, and your faculty and your program director and your mentors should be able to help you with that as well. But I wouldn't exclude the match this past year. I don't think it was so off for what what programs were looking for.
And that's a great perspective. And I think another big thing that's come up in some of my conversations with folks, as I'm sure everyone else has had too, is the reapplicant, right? How are those, and I don't know the numbers this year. I have a weird sneaking feeling that it's maybe a little bit higher, not maybe significantly higher, but a little bit higher than years past. But what do we, and I'll ask you, Dr. Kaur, what should we be saying or sharing with students who are reapplying in the context of they've deferred graduation, they're still considered a medical student? How should they approach the away rotation selection if they're being allowed to do that?
Great question. I think, one, it's a good decision to defer graduation and leave yourself open to being able to do that one away rotation. Gives you sort of that even playing field, gives you an away opportunity, which you didn't have last year. I do think you can take advantage of your faculty mentor or program director to reach out to some of the programs that you interviewed at previously to get a feel that you don't want to, again, you get that one away, you don't want to waste your one away. So you want to be as thoughtful about it as you can. Some of the students who didn't match this past year have directly reached out to the programs, and I don't think that's bad to ask for feedback, but I think a program director or a faculty mentor can do that as well and help guide you. So that gives you a little bit of extra direction in picking your one away. But I would certainly encourage reapplicants to do an away and to be thoughtful about where they're doing it.
Yeah, I think those are all important points. And I think that and I know Dr. Levine in another webinar has brought up the notion of, I think many students, and we don't know this for sure, not yet, but many who may not have matched may not have taken advantage of enough virtual opportunities as well. And I think that's something that's really important. So with that in mind, Dr. Hogan, I'll ask you, do you think, does it make a difference if someone is doing an in-person rotation versus or a virtual opportunity at that, at a given institution, whether it be Pitt or otherwise?
So I think the virtual experiences, I mean, have changed the game somewhat. I think they will actually continue to change the game in regards to how we move forward, even post-COVID, because institutions will start using them, and now you have this extended kind of soft reach, right? And it's technology, and saying, hey, we have our lecture schedule, it's available to you. We have these events, they're available to you. And I think you're going to start having programs strategically place them pre-interview day intentionally to figure out, and pre-application period to find out, you know what, who is really interested in this place. And it's another way to screen us down. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a way to try to get to know individuals and then say, hey, these are the individuals we would really, at least they're going to be higher on our list of individuals to consider for interview. I think that's a respectful thing to consider. The other piece is that as we continue to go forward with this, we still don't know what's going to happen when the step one scores officially become non-numeric, right? I find it very interesting in the year where step one was even voted to become, pass fail, that we have a pandemic that gives us something that we think we're going to freak out about. No OAs, no in-person interviews. Orthopedics is going to die by the vine, right? We survived. we match people and we move on. And so I think the virtual piece is going to be a dynamic. And I know there are several students that we had this year who were very interested in programs. And I had program directors say to us, oh yeah, our residents said they really didn't participate in the virtual experience that we had. I think that will become its own problem, right? The same way we talk about students applying to too many programs, students will eventually come back in a year or two and say, there's no way we can do 165 virtual experiences for 3 to 4 weeks straight. And we'll say that's okay, right? And so, but if you're interested in a program, no question about it. You need to, if they have virtual opportunities that are available, I would strongly encourage you to try to find a way to fit one of those into your schedule and prioritize it. And if you're truly interested in that program, you'll find a way to make it happen.
And I'll ask this question to Dr. Shorter. First off, thanks, Dr. Hogan, that was great perspective there. Dr. Shorter, does the in-person, and this is, I think, a very important point, does the in-person rotation guarantee someone an interview?
I think that's different at every place. No, it doesn't. I mean, certainly it can guarantee you not getting an interview if you, don't work hard, don't show yourself hard, and act like a total jerk, right? I mean, so I think that while it'd be great to say, sure, you're definitely going to get an interview, no, it's not the case.
Do you think that if I'm going to ask this question of Dr. Gainey here in a second as well, if someone turned down an in-person rotation, are they at risk for not getting an interview? And imagine if they did a virtual experience and not an in-person rotation. Do you think that person would be at risk for not getting an interview invite?
No, I think, as we discussed before, it's really important to just be a courteous human, right? If you've been accepted at 7 OAs at the same time, and then you don't deny the other 6 until the day before, that is something that will probably be looked on very poorly by the majority of programs, because we spend a lot of time, making a grid of who goes where and who rotates here and when. And so those names we remember, but other, especially in these last year and this year and, however it's going to be this year, that certainly won't affect us if you say, I already have another one that I got.
Got it. Dr. Gainey, same question. Someone denies or turns down an in-person but does a virtual experience instead, or just doesn't do an in-person rotation whatsoever and doesn't do anything virtual either, are they at risk for not getting an interview based on y'all's screening criteria?
I mean, I don't think so. And I think, like everyone said, this year, we understand that it's a different year, but I also think, it's another way to show interest, right? I mean, assume you're not applying to 40 different places, if you're applying to 3 or 4, and maybe I'm not your number 1, but at least I'm 2 or 3 on your list, that's important for me to know too, and that's actually helpful for me, because everyone that didn't apply, I was lower down on their list. So I think that it shows interest. Even last year we had a list of all the people that, and it's hard because we have all these webinars, we don't know how to communicate with people. So the only emails we have are the people that have reached out to us in order to at least, tell you, other than social media, hey, we have this webinar going on. So for us, when none of us knew how to use social media, we started out with, just the emails of the people that had reached out to us. and from there we're able to grow. So just showing interest, I think, is helpful.
Tabs,
Yes,
can I ask you one question? You can't turf it.
of course.
As a program director of some top programs for the faculty here, how in depth do we review applications from students from mid-tier or lower tier schools that weren't able to rotate with you?
So at least in Miami, there have been some step screening. There was step screening that has occurred over the years, even this year. And then every application, and I know the program, one of the program directors made it, they went through everybody who met at least their basic screens. And they go, and that's irrespective of school, to be honest. And I know in having reviewed a handful of applications, I saw, student applications from all over the place, schools I wasn't as familiar with, and this is not this past year specifically, but the year prior. But we've gone through all of them, higher tier, mid-tier, lower tier, what have you. So I don't personally think that the school itself, which is I think what the question is getting at, dictates specifically whether you can match at what you consider a elite level institution or not, or just match into orthopedics, period. But I think it's the entire package. The disadvantage that school or students at schools that don't have robust resources is that they may not have a lot of faculty to talk to, as Dr. Gainey was alluding to earlier. They may not have a home program, and so those are their own challenges that you have to sort of overcome. But that's a topic for a different conversation. But yes, we do review everybody.
All right, thanks. And Tabs, I know you're keeping tabs on this, but oh, no pun. But we do have 4 minutes left.
Okay. So, I'll ask Dr. Laporte this, second to last question. Do you think there's a limit to virtual rotations, or should be a limit?
Yes, but I think each student can figure that out based on what their bandwidth is. So basically see what the commitment is for the virtual and make sure you can put in what's expected. I think you are worse off if you sign up and don't show up than if you didn't sign up at all. So just understand what the commitment is and make sure you can do it, and that should help set your limit. That's my thought.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And I would also just say that the virtual rotations and virtual experiences, I anticipate personally that there's probably going to be more of them this year, just because we also know that there's only one away rotation that's physically allowed, and the competition for that will likely be fierce. So as a result, take advantage of the fact that there's no limitations to it. So as long as it jives with your schedule, then go ahead and do as many as you can to just get that exposure, so you can try to figure out for yourself what kind of program really suits you and will allow you to thrive. With that in mind, I will actually turn the mic over to Dr. Levine to share his key takeaways that he's sort of learned in the past few weeks with regards to guiding his students in this particular situation.
All right, well, we have 507 people on this webinar right now. So thank you to all of you for participating, and to the faculty. This has been fantastic. I'm really sorry it's only an hour. We probably could have gone another 2 hours. I know that we've just touched the surface. I just put my email address in the Q&A session. I'm sure the other faculty will do the same. Please feel free to reach out to us. Tabs and I have been spending the last month talking to people who didn't match from around the country to try to go through their situations individually. There are 2 lessons that we learned or have learned. This was a bi-directional process this year. As students applying in orthopedic surgery, you've never had to be more proactive. If you ask the question, should I do this and should I do that? The answer is probably categorically yes. Should you take advantage of the virtual offerings? Yes. Should you ask your mentors that you trust the most to really go out of their way to advocate for you? The answer is yes. Should you feel comfortable talking to your mentors and saying, listen, I really want to go to the University of Connecticut. Would you mind reaching out to Dr. Gainey? The answer is yes. If you can't be your best advocate this year and next, then who else can be? So that's my kind of takeaway from talking to lots of students from around the country. Now, I'm going to give you a very specific thing we've done at Columbia. Whether you can transfer this and translate it to your own programs, I can't speak to that, but you can at least know this is what we've done. I have 10 medical students applying in orthopedics this coming cycle. I asked them each to give me their #1 choice of where they wanted to rotate, just like we normally would, except this time we did something a little different. First of all, we said only 2 of you will go to the same program because we want it to be like Noah's Ark, and it's unlikely that a program would offer more than 3 students from a program an interview. That was a question asked in the Q&A significantly. So that was the first step. The second step was, because I know all of these program directors on this webinar and elsewhere, I then called the program directors of those 2 of the programs my students wanted to go to and said, here are the 2 applicants that are interested in coming to your program. They're very similar to the typical type of residents from Columbia that you've matched historically. Would you please take a look at their CVs? Some of the program directors said, don't even need to look at them because we know if you tell us that that's who they are, we're happy. Others said, yeah, send them. So what we've done is we've already procured the away rotations for our Columbia medical students so that they don't have to apply to 3 or 4 programs and then get denied. It's very specific, I get it, but that was how we've handled it to try to decrease some of the stress on them for having to not apply to more. If you don't have that situation, you've heard lots of great advice tonight, hopefully, on how to manage it in your own ecosystem. And I think we always say that and come back to that unfortunately, we can give as specific advice as we want to for our own ecosystems, but you're all going to have to figure out how that translates into your own programs. And whether or not it does or doesn't, I think you'll be able to tell. Last thing I'd say is, if you don't have local mentorship, if you don't have people that you can find as an ally, then reach out to people like Orthomentor, like people that are doing these types of webinars, and hopefully they can at least help guide you into a pathway where everyone here is doing this because of one reason. We're committed to trying to help students get into orthopedic residencies. We could all be doing something else right now, but thanks to all of the faculty for giving up your time. Mac, I saw you try to kiss your child goodnight. That was really sweet. And we really appreciate it. So those are my final thoughts. Tabs, you get to wrap it up.
First off, Dr. L, I couldn't have said it better myself. To everyone here tonight, thank you for your time, both faculty who are amazing as always, and to all the attendees. Again, this information is applicable to everybody, not just those going to orthopedics. Just as an FYI, if you don't have any sort of strong connections, feel free to reach out to myself, to Dr. L, any of the other faculty, put their email addresses in there so you can at least, serves as a stepping stone. So with that, thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll be in touch soon.
Hey, Tabs, where can they hear
Yes.
the recording of this?
In the next couple of days, I will be putting the recording up on YouTube. The link will be available on the Orthomentor Instagram page as well, but it will be on YouTube under the Orthomentor channel.
And I'd finally like to thank Ross Mueller from my department at Columbia. Ross is here giving his own time as well and volunteering to help navigate this. So Ross, really appreciate you. Good night, everybody, and good luck in this cycle. And hopefully you all get your first choice for your away sub-Is.